I'm glad Todd didn't get in the wrong room. Before we get started, one thing I wanted that Michelle asked me to double check with everybody. Anybody who needs a vegetarian meal or something other than the chicken, that will be the main course. Please let the serving folks know. Thank you. Speak of the devil, here comes Brian Matamore.
We were worried sick about you.
Just a quick word on networking. Again, you hear me say this every meeting. While we have a no solicitation policy, what we do want to emphasize is the opportunity of each of us to meet new people and to use that as an advantage in terms of building your own network, not just in terms of a network that can get you business, but a network that helps you enhance your business. So when you look around the room with the different skill sets we have here, I think of ATD as an awesome consulting company. And many of you I would naturally call on for different projects that might come my way, and hopefully you all feel the same way. One quick survey question of the group that we were talking about at the board. We didn't do meals here. Who would miss them? Wow. So maybe 3 or 4 people. Something we're looking at is a possibility. Maybe doing hors d'oeuvres and drinks before meetings is kind of an idea. Did you also know that we're streaming live right now? You all know that? Okay. We're streaming live right now and recording these sessions. So those of you who are in other meetings that you may miss, we put all those recordings up on our website, unless a speaker doesn't want to be recorded. Sometimes the corporation won't let them be recorded. But all the past meetings we've had are available.
It's too late to change my mind.
I also wanted to mention that we have a blog on the website that nobody submitted anything to, but those of you who are writers and would like to submit material for the website, we encourage you to do so. Board of Directors is what makes this group go. Without them, I would be lost, quite frankly. We're an active group and looking for new board members. Coming your way in June, after our June meeting, at our June meeting, we'll be electing new board members or re-electing current board members who plan to re-up. I think there's 3 or 4 of them. But we're still looking for other board members. There's a couple of open slots. Membership. We're looking at different deals for membership. And you'll be getting some of this in the survey. But in terms of membership, joining locally has its advantages, and joining at the national level has additional advantages. The combination of the two we call power membership, and I would encourage you to look on the website for more detail on the benefits of both. Thanks to our sponsors. Again, without them, we would not cover our costs. These are some of the companies in the past that have sponsored us. Next month, Anna, would you like to speak to Brandon?
Hello, everybody. So next month, we are going to have with us Brandon Carson, who is the Director of Learning at Home Depot. And it's a very exciting opportunity for all of us, and I hope for many more people to join us and learn from Brendan. And he will be talking to us, he'll be sharing his experience and his vision and his insights about emerging technologies and as they relate to the learning approaches and how these emerging technologies also are changing approaches to learning in the workplace. Brendan wrote a book, Learning in the Age of Immediacy. And the book has just been published recently. And we will have an opportunity to buy the book right here and to have it autographed by Brendan. He's very active in various communities and with various associations, even with the North American Gaming Association, which is the association that really brings some content and experience around using games for learning and games just in general, which is a big trend right now in the learning space. So without further speaking more about Brendan, because I think we will have plenty of information on the flyer here. Just please join us next month in June. And when you see the promotion of Brendan's event with us on LinkedIn, please share it with your network, with your friends, colleagues, anyone, for us to have a great event on June 19th.
Thanks, Anna.
Any new members in the room tonight? None?
Yes.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Sure. What would you like to know?
Whatever you want to say.
So, my name is Monica Bianchi, and I live in Norwalk. I was invited by Susan. And
Want to use this picture?
very nice.
Sure.
My name is Monica Piasczyk. I was invited by Susan Kelly here. Glad to be here. Looking forward to the nice meeting.
Welcome. How about guests? Leslie, you're a new member?
I am.
Tell us about yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Leslie Litsky. I'm a new member. I was brought by Sandra, meeting her at another event. And I live in Westchester County and I do learning and development with a combination of project management work, and came last time and was happy to come.
Denise is happy, another border crosser.
We need a fence.
And how many of you are guests or not members? We certainly welcome you as a member. Okay, with that, let me hand the mic over to Steve Gardner, who will introduce Todd.
Can you hear me in the back row there? Okay. Normally I don't work to introduce somebody with a piece of paper, but my good friend Todd Cherches went to the time to actually put a little something together. So in honor of Todd, I'm going to read this to you. I don't know how much of his background you had a chance to see on the website, but Todd is a CEO and co-founder of BigBlueGumball, a New York City-based management and leadership consulting, training, and coaching firm. Before getting into the leadership development field, Todd started his career in advertising with Ogilvy and Mather before in New York City, and then he moved to LA, where he spent 10 years working in the TV and theme park industries for a variety of companies, including Disney and CBS. If you ever have a chance to hear him tell stories about Disney and CBS, he's got some real whoppers. So with his background in that industry, and as you might guess from their name, Todd's company takes a very unique and innovative approach to learning and development. BigBlueGumball's motto is, and tagline is, "We make training entertaining." And Todd's personal mission is, through his training and coaching work, to help make the world a better place, one leader at a time. In addition to his own business, Todd is proud to be an award-winning adjunct professor at NYU, where he teaches a popular graduate course entitled Leadership and Team Building for their HR Master's program, and also will be joining the faculty of Columbia University starting this fall. Lastly, although he's a New York City guy, we consider Todd an honorary resident of our community because his nice wife, Karen, grew up in Fairfield. Thank you, Todd, for joining us. We're in for a treat.
Thanks.
You have it, Maestro.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for John also for the invitation. I know your salads and your chicken is what you're eating. It may get in the way, but it's nice to be highly interactive. fast-paced, and a little bit creative. So first thing I ask you to do is everyone grab a piece of paper and a marker from the center of the table. Keep it near you. I know you have a lot of dishes and everything, but that way you have it handy. We're going to be using those shortly, so this way you have it on you. And I know it's yeah, there's some pens as well, but grab a marker. So you may need to eat with one hand and write with another, but we'll make it work. So anyway, tonight's about the power of visual leadership. And visual leadership, if you look at it, it's written, I write it in this way, one word with a capital L, and I'll tell you why in just a couple of minutes. But basically, visual leadership is about the art and science of applying visual thinking and visual communication to manage and lead yourself and your people to higher levels of performance. So that's a long-winded definition. So while you're eating, let's do some dinner conversation. Take 2 or 3 minutes and answer the question, what would you guess visual leadership is? I just said it's about using visual thinking, it's about using visual communication, but how can you be a more effective, whatever you are, a trainer, a coach, an executive, business professional, a teacher, whatever you do, how can using visuals help you to be more effective? So take, let's say 3 or 4 minutes at your tables, have that conversation, and let's see what you came up with. Go.
So I guess the first thing is what do you
Well,
Yeah, that's the question. Right, it's not just saying it, you're modeling it. You're modeling it.
yeah, I thought of it one way. I was thinking of it more as it's a way to communicate.
So it's
Walking the talk.
walking the talk, and then it's communicating visually. Right. Any other thoughts?
Using images
Anybody else? So those are the two.
things like that.
Okay, I'm doing that to save my voice. I'm going to stop you right there. Whenever you talk about your tables, I eavesdropped, I heard some keywords. What were some keywords that jumped out of your conversation? Let's get 1 or 2 from each table. What was some of the, word or bullet point, what came out of your conversation?
Picture worth 1,000 words.
Okay, picture worth 1,000 words. Great. This table.
Helping people picture what the objective is or an emotion is that they're experiencing.
Okay, great. Thank you. What about at the back?
Transvestite.
Say again?
Transvestite. No,
Never
that wasn't it. No, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
So we said modeling and walking the talk.
Okay, walking the talk and modeling. Okay, great. We got one from this table.
You were the band.
Sorry.
What about this table? One word or phrase that came out of your conversation. Visualizing imagination at this table. Storytelling. Great.
Painting the picture for the future.
All right, painting the picture of the future. Okay, so tonight's workshop is to be very visual. So while you're looking down, hopefully you'll also look up so you don't miss anything. So again, tonight's about the power of visual leadership. One of the things that, as Steve said, my name is Todd Cherches. One of the things that John mentioned during his opening, that part of the ATD meetings is networking, getting to know more about your fellow members, right? So we want to know a little bit more about who you are. So what we're going to do is we're going to go around the room and ask you to tell us what's your name, where you're from, what you do, where you work, and what are some of your hobbies. So who wants to start us off? No, we're not going to do that. But what we are going to do is this. We want to know who you are and why you get a chance to interact with someone else. So you're going to have a 5-minute, actually I'm going to shorten it to 4-minute conversation with someone you don't know or don't know that well. Anyone sitting right next to you. Who knows who this is? Bill Nye, the science guy. One of his quotes that I like is that everyone you will ever meet knows knows something you don't. So your goal is to interview the person sitting next to you, find out something you don't know about them already. But here's the catch. I almost forgot to mention this minor detail, is that you're not allowed to speak. So there's no talking involved. So you may be thinking, how am I going to do this? Just for curiosity, how many people here can draw? All right. You may not be able to draw like Da Vinci, but can you at least draw a stick figure? All right. So let's put it to the test. Let's just practice. Grab a piece of paper, grab your marker, and just draw along with me. I know you have your chicken waiting, but give it a second. So no, don't draw your chicken, don't draw your swords, don't do anything until I tell you to. So first thing, just draw a square. If you can't do this, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. So just so draw a square. Then on top of the square, draw a circle. Again, we're practicing our shapes. On top of the circle, draw a little triangle. Are you falling behind? Okay, make 2 lines underneath the square. 2 angular lines next to the square, and if you want to put a smiley face. And right there, now how many people here can draw? Everyone, right? So
It has no nose.
that's quite all right. If you want to add some shoes so it doesn't tip over, that's fine too. So here's one of the parameters of this exercise. You need to ask your questions in drawing as well as answer them, so there's no speaking. So if I drew this, what might I be asking you? If I drew this, what might I be asking? Where are you from? If I drew this? Tell me how you feel. What about this? You have any pets? So and I can't draw at all. So if I could do this, anyone could do it. So with that, and this is not an art class, so there's a saying that's why pencils have erasers. Unfortunately, you're using markers, so this is applying to you. But don't worry about not drawing well. This is all about kind of a combination of Pictionary and charades. You're going to get a chance to interview the person next to you and have a 4-minute conversation. So with that, yes, if you're sitting next to someone you know, you can mix it up a little bit. And I'm going to put the timer on right now. You have 5 minutes and go. No talking. Go. I'm hearing a lot of talking, and so you're not supposed to be any talking. So no talking starting now. Go.
I'm sorry, that was directed exercise. All right, so we won't do it.
I'm hearing a lot of talking. Laughing's okay, talking is not. You can point and gesture if you'd like. Okay, you have 2 minutes left.
Oh.
1 minute left. Thirty seconds left. $15 seconds left. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Speak.
Hard.
Hard, what made it hard? Aaron, hard but fun. What made it hard, what made it fun?
It was hard to ask questions about occupation to find a visual for the word occupation. I was curious about her occupation, and so I just do a heart for what do you love. And then she misinterpreted my light bulb as a key. So, I mean, there was a lot of lack of communication.
All right, great. So in the course of trying to communicate, we sometimes misinterpret. Someone may be asking you one thing and you answer another thing. Does that ever happen in real life? Okay. What else? So what else did you experience? Yes, Todd.
Wow, where do you live? I didn't know exactly how to draw a Seymour.
A what?
Seymour. I live in Seymour, Connecticut.
Oh, okay. Okay, so maybe
I'm not sure what
somebody
he
see
looks
more.
like.
You know?
I'm not sure what he looks like.
All right. So who else? What else did you
It
experience?
took time, right? Because it took time to think how you were going to draw it, it just took time.
So even in regular communication, in spoken communication, doesn't it take time to formulate your thoughts? Say, who's my audience? What's this person going to understand? What's going to resonate with them, right? So when we ask how many here can draw, we only had a few people raise their hands. If you were to ask a group of first graders, how many would raise their hand? Everyone. So over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, do we lose our ability to draw or our confidence? A lot of times, right? So if a first grader can draw, then surely we can. So think about this. So that was a chance to warm up both sides of your brain, do a little thinking and a little creativity. So when might you use drawing or visuals to think or communicate more effectively in your job? So who can give us a couple of examples of, tell us what you do and how you use visual thinking in some way or visual communication in your job? Who can give us a couple of examples?
Yeah, like many people here, I'm a learning and development professional. And very often I'll use something where people have to draw something or create something because it connects the analytical side with their emotional side.
Okay, great.
And so that way it creates a connection to what they're doing, and it helps with the learning transfer and sustainability, because drawing for an adult in a training situation is really unusual and weird.
Yeah, yeah. So it gets people to think differently, right? Use different parts of the brain, and use the magic word connection, which we're going to go back to in just a couple of minutes. What else? Who else? Just an example. Yeah.
So, you know, Todd, I'm a trainer like yourself, and it might be a 2-hour talk or a 2-day talk, and I create a mind map, which is a visual technique to organize information instead of having an agenda, which is a linear text-based thing. I just draw images, so I can go 2 days without really having to refer to my notes. I just look at the image, and I know it triggers that content.
Yep. Yeah, great. How many people here use mind maps in your work? So to sketch, map things out, and to visualize. Let's get 1 or 2 more examples. Yes, from your
Pyramid. I use pyramids in helping people understand the concept of summiting, like climbing a mountain.
Okay, good. So reaching the peak.
And which reminds me of Maslow's hierarchy of needs in the pyramid, which helps to explain the logic and the story he's trying to tell.
Yeah. So using Maslow's hierarchy as one example, what's the power of a model, a mental model or a framework in a coaching context, in a training or in a development context? What is the power? Why not just text? What does a model do?
It's easy to remember.
Well, what happens on it? What makes it easy?
Because you recall the visual, you recall what it looks like. If you recall what it looks like, then you can remember what it means.
Right. So if you're looking at a paragraph of text and until you read it, you don't know what it is. A model, instantaneous recognition when you have a visual model. Great. Who else? What else? Mental models or frameworks? Yes.
Worked with a board recently that weren't working very well together, so as part of the coaching program, using photographs to get them to visualize what an effective board relationship looked like, and then create words out of that.
All right, great. Yeah, so the idea of visualizing an idealized future state and saying, what can we do to connect our current reality to this future vision, right? So as we move full steam ahead, here's one example. Earlier in my career as a project manager in the theme park business, and my company sent me to China, we produced these, it was actually written up in this theme park magazine. I was actually mentioned in the same line as Confucius, which I thought it was kind of fascinating. I was only 30 at the time. I had never seen my name in print before. But my company made theme park rides and attractions, including these life-size elephants, sheep, and cows that we made in Los Angeles and shipped to China, and I would go and oversee the installation. The problem was I didn't speak Chinese, and all of the workers didn't speak English. So I had to use my drawing skills. And again, I am not an artist by any means, but if I needed a hammer, I didn't know the Chinese word for hammer or screwdriver, right? So I did a lot of drawing, a lot of pointing, as did they. So that was an example of using visual thinking in the real world. So you have to think, right, how do I draw this? How do I communicate this with someone who doesn't speak English? And a lot of my students at NYU are international students from other countries, including like probably 60 to 70% from China. I use a lot of the power of visuals helps to translate things across into other languages. So a real life example of this, like where I could have used this but didn't. Some of you may have read this in one of my blog posts. I was once in a restaurant and I asked for more ice, and I got this. Now, why do you think that happened?
They thought you said rice.
Yeah, now my New York accent must have gotten in the way, but I asked for more ice, they heard more rice. Whose fault was that? It was no one's fault, although isn't the burden of communicating on the communicator. If I got the wrong thing, I would have to say that's kind of my fault. Now, if I had said, can I have some more ice, pointing at my glass, that visual might have clarified any potential miscommunication. Now, it's good thing I didn't say, can I have some ice, because that inability led to some problems. I actually wrote about this in my blog post that's on LinkedIn called Ice, Rice, or Mice. Has this ever happened to you? Some of my tips for miscommunication. When I was younger, we'd be driving in the car going to my grandmother's house with my father driving, my mother in the passenger seat, my brother and me in the back seat, and we'd be driving, and this would happen every single time. My father would say, hurry up, someone give me a pencil and paper. And my mother would roll her eyes and say, why, Harvey? Why do you need a pencil and paper? And he'd say, what? Why? Don't you see the sign? So that's one of those groaning, corny dad jokes, but I can't pass a drawbridge sign without thinking of my father and thinking of this sign, and my wife can attest to the fact that I pull this out whenever I never let this opportunity pass. My father, who passed away 2 years ago, I always remember him whenever I see a drawbridge sign. I started thinking about drawbridge in the context of what I do, and if you break out the two words, draw and bridge, when you think about draw, what comes to mind? Forget about the drawbridge as it opens up, but when you think about the word draw, and you've already started drawing today, what comes to mind? What other words or concepts?
Sketch.
Picture, sketch.
Communicating.
Communicating, what else?
Gambling.
In what way? Oh, draw like
Draw,
poker. Okay, great. So all these words come to mind around creativity and picking up a pen and actually drawing something. When you think about bridges, so visual imagery as it relates to draw, but when you hear the word bridge, what word comes to mind? Ross mentioned the word connection, right? Bridging the gap, connecting ideas, connecting people. So if you think about it, that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, is how to use visual imagery to connect ideas and to connect people in the context of leadership and learning, which is the business that we're all in. So moving full steam ahead, now I'm going to really start to pick up the pace. There was a book that we used in my college class called Bridges, Not Walls, and I always loved the image, which is a brick bridge. And when you think about this as a metaphor or an analogy for communication, bridges connect us while walls divide us, right? So bricks or stones can be used to achieve either of those. So I love that we're going to be talking about the power of metaphor and analogy and storytelling as we go along. This is an image and a title that has always resonated with me all these years later. So,
President.
Say again?
For president.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I don't want to get political, so I'm not going down that road. So, one other book from college, I read it in high school, but Shakespeare's Hamlet. One of the scenes in Act 1, Scene 2, Hamlet said, methinks I think see my father, where my lord, in my mind's eye, Horatio. So Shakespeare coined the term in mind's eye. What does it mean to see something in your mind's eye? What does that phrase mean? Again? In your vision?
Imagination.
Your imagination.
Imagination? Great. So we actually what? Picture something mentally that may not exist in reality. And isn't that a big part of what leadership is about? Helping to make things that don't exist realities. So one of the quotes I love that when it comes to being a visual leader, only those who can see the invisible can do the impossible. So we need to have an image of some idealized future state, and part of being a leader is to help people achieve these visions and make them real. So Einstein used the word visual leadership and came up with this formula. Actually, he didn't, I have to confess. But if you quote Einstein, you get people's attention, it gives you more credibility. He never said this, but this is my formula, which is that visual leadership is when you take visual thinking and visual communication and apply it to management and leadership. And that's what we're going to be doing tonight. I'm going to give you a variety of different tools, tips, and techniques to help you do that. Just so you know, coincidentally, it was just exactly a year and a couple of days ago, May 17th, I actually, after 2 years of fighting with the patent office, I actually got the trademark on the word visual leadership, which is going to be the title of the book I'm working on. And so that was kind of exciting. It's all about using visual thinking in a leadership context. So Einstein did say, however, that time is an illusion, and we only have about an hour together tonight. So we're going to move full steam ahead, and because of the limited time we have, you're only going to be able to get what? Right. So when it comes to visual thinking, sometimes you don't even need to use spoken words. The visual speaks for itself. So I want to ask this question. I posed this before. Why visuals? What is it about visuals? It makes, say again, in any of these contexts, a thinker, communicator, trainer, David.
We absorb more information visually than auditorily.
Okay, so we absorb more. What else? Yes, Anna.
Well, that's your picture with the iceberg. It creates analogy, and people relate to analogies, and it creates also the story.
Yeah, so storytelling, analogies and metaphors. We're going to talk a lot about that later.
It's unifying too, isn't it? When you put that image up, all of a sudden now we know we're all clear, we're all on the same page.
Yeah, we're all looking at the same thing. Great. And you, tell me your name?
Leslie, I think also people learn very differently, and you have to respect the fact that some people don't read as quickly as other people and can't keep up in other ways. And a visual picture is something everyone can absorb at the same speed.
Exactly. Great, thank you. So with that in mind, there's 3 things that I identified, and they kind of rhyme. So the words attention, comprehension, and retention. So if you think about these 3 words, when you use visuals, they help to capture people's attention and get them to focus. If I have a visual up on the screen, everyone's going to be focused on it, looking at it, gets your attention more than text would, right? In terms of comprehension, it helps to increase understanding, right? A picture's worth 1,000 words. It helps to create a sense of, I know what he's talking about now because I can actually see it. And retention, how does it help memory? Nick mentioned that before. We can think back on it. We can picture that mental model and reflect on what we were taught. There's Microsoft did an attention span study a couple of years ago. Did anyone ever see the results of this? It was really interesting. How long would you say the average person's attention span is before they start thinking all of this?
2 minutes.
No, it's like 7 seconds.
Right, their number came up with 8.25 seconds. So that's how long you have before people start clicking on other websites or checking their phone. That's how long you have before you lose them.
We're thinking about transvestites.
I won't even go there. I don't know where that came from. But, we're going to move forward. This is 8 seconds. It's down from the 12 seconds it was a number of years ago. If our attention span today is 8 seconds, how long is the next generation going to be as people focus more on social media and devices? Who knows what has an attention span of 9 seconds, supposedly? A goldfish, exactly right. So a goldfish is sitting here laughing at us, saying, I don't know how you measure the attention span of a goldfish. If you show them a really boring PowerPoint presentation, I don't know what you do to measure that. But let's do an actual real life test. Hold your hand up straight in the air if you would for a second, and make the OK sign. And then bring it down slowly, slowly, and then when I say go, put it right on your chin. Go. How many people have it on their chin?
Oh.
I see a lot of people on their cheeks. Okay. All right, so a little bit of showmanship there. Some did, some didn't. But what is that about? I saw a number of people do this, but if you did this, by the way, you only get half credit. It's because I did it. So what was... So talk about that.
Mimicking you.
All right, so people were mimicking me. So why, I said chin, why did you do chin? Why was I mimicked? Because of what?
Simon says.
Say it again?
Yeah.
Simon says.
Simon says. So there's a principle called the picture superiority effect, and the principle is that vision trumps all other senses. If you hear something and you see something, the vision part of your brain will dominate. So even if you know, you may have a little bit of a delay. You may eventually get, oh yeah, he said chin, but scientific studies have shown that vision trumps all other senses. I'm not going to show you this video, I show this in longer workshops, but just write this down. It's called the McGurk effect. It's so weird. I'm not going to tell you what it's about, but just Google it. It's on YouTube. Look it up on YouTube, the McGurk effect. And it'll kind of like freak out your head a little bit, and I'll just leave it at that. So, but for more on the picture superiority effect, I'm going to drop in some recommendations. The book Brain Rules, has anyone ever read this, by John Medina? It's an excellent book, but you can also Google him. He has tons of videos on some of his principles, but he talks about the picture superiority effect. And there's this famous study that the retention of details 3 days later, if you show people words only, if they read text or hear text, 3 days later they remember about 10% of what they heard or read. If you show them a picture, they remember 35%. But if you show them a picture to accompany the words, they remember 65%. So it just goes to show the power of pictures and pictures. And again, some people prefer text, some people prefer visuals, but regardless, when you combine the two and they kind of feed off each other. And then also, I see some people taking pictures of the slides. Is there a way of getting the slides out to everyone? I'm happy to send a copy of the slides so you don't have to do that. You'll have a copy of these.
Me.
Afterwards. Okay, so Jim will get those out to you so you don't have to do that. So real life example, in my NYU class, when we talk about the suggested reading, when I put this up on the screen, what are you doing? You're all reading the paragraph up top and no one's listening to me. So I would cut that out and just have the list. But why have that when I can just do this? Right? Which would you rather look at, this or this? Which is going to be more effective? And again, it's the picture superiority effect in action, and which you're going to pay attention to, understand, and remember more as your left brain and right brain battle it out. Which side of the brain is going to win? The right brain, the visual side of your brain, always defeats the left side based on scientific studies. One of my Chinese students gave me this expression, which means seeing is believing, said by the same philosopher who said hearing something 100 times is better than seeing it once, which reminds us of what?
Pictures worth 1,000 words.
Exactly, right? So in any language, it's the same principle throughout all of history. Napoleon said this. Anyone speak French? So what does that say?
I'm good.
The croissants are warm.
Croissants are warm. Okay. Now it actually says a good sketch is better than a long speech. Now it's so Napoleon said the same thing. Now we're going to take a deep dive into the power of visual thinking, communication, and leadership. That's what we're going to be doing for the rest of this evening. So let's start with visual thinking. What do the following images have in common?
Circle. Faces, eyes.
Now, do these faces actually exist on these items? I just learned this term a couple of weeks ago, pareidolia, a psychological phenomenon in which the mind responds to a stimulus, for example, an image, by perceiving a pattern where none exists. So our brains are creating these faces. We see faces where they don't exist. So that's, again, the visual side of the brain dominating our thinking. Same thing when we see a man on the moon, or we look up and we see shapes in clouds. Those shapes don't really exist except in our imagination where we see them. We say, doesn't that look like? And again, that's the visual side of our brain in action. So real-life examples of visual thinking and visual communication. Anyone ever put a piece of IKEA furniture together?
Never successful.
By the way, if anyone needs any of these, we have about 8 bags of them. Just see us after the workshop. So again, this is the power of visual thinking and visual communication. This is not text. This is a picture that shows how to put this thing together. What does this tell us? What does this tell us? Right? So in every field, we have visual ways of representing what it is we want to communicate, what we're thinking. And think about the challenge of what we're trying to do. We're trying to get a picture out of our heads into someone else's head. And think about how hard that is to get an idea from one person's head into their other. Rich mentioned mind mapping. So starting out with a topic and branching out in a different direction. I showed you an example of napkin sketching. Grabbing a napkin, grabbing a piece of paper, a flip chart, a whiteboard, sketching something out to get your idea across. This is my visual checklist. If I make sure I have everything I need when I'm teaching a class or doing a workshop, I could just have a written list. But what's the power of this versus, as I'm packing my bag to go to do a training, what's the power of this as opposed to just a linear bullet point list?
You make sure that it's in your bag.
Yeah, I can literally say, do I have my timer? Do I have my bell? Right? So why is that more effective than just going down a written checklist?
Just easy.
How does it make it easy, dude?
You can see it. You can just see it.
Yeah, you can see. You can see if something's missing. So
And
again,
honestly, you'll get what you want, right? They'll get you Poland Spring as opposed to any other water.
sometimes I may say I don't care, but they may, sometimes people can take it literally and say,
Yeah.
right, that's exactly what we got you. So I have an expression that wisdom is where knowledge and experience meet. What's much more powerful, this sentence or this image? It's the same concept, right? But this one will stay with you, and this one will trigger all kinds of thoughts and debate about. I use this a lot when I do generational training, because a lot of times baby boomers feel like, hey, I have all this experience, but why don't people respect the knowledge I have? And the millennials come along and say, well, we have all this cutting edge knowledge, and the real power of wisdom is when baby boomers and Gen Xers and millennials can all work together, and together they're much wiser as a group or as a team than either generation would be on their own. So that's a little bit on the power of visual thinking. Now we're going to shift to the power of visual communication, visual imagery, visual language, and visual storytelling. So I wrote this blog post a couple of years ago that people repost every year on Martin Luther King Day. Why do I call him, what makes him the king of visual communication?
His gestures.
Say again?
His ability to gesture.
His gesturing is one aspect. What else? What else did he do?
Just very effectively speaking in metaphors and word pictures.
Yeah, metaphors and word pictures. So what are some, does anyone remember any of them? I'm going to give you some samples, but what are some of the word pictures that he used?
Well, I have a dream speech that was that whole analogy between putting things in a bank and drawing on those, and then also the mountaintop of, Lookout Mountain, Tennessee, across the country, et cetera, et cetera.
And you didn't see this, right?
No.
Yeah, so Brian hit on a couple of these things. So one is, I'm just going to put them up for a second. Look at some of the metaphors that he used in just one I Have a Dream speech. This is all in one speech. The power of the visual language, making the intangible tangible. Look at the power of the words, the alliteration, the use of rhyme. Let freedom ring from where? I took this map and I overlaid the places that he mentioned. Let it ring from the mighty mountains of New York, etc. So it's like, when you think about it visually, after doing this, I heard his speech in a whole new way. I actually pictured the places that he was mentioning. It's like, why these places? So it made it even more interesting and more powerful. But as was mentioned, one of the things he was greatest at was his use of metaphors and analogies. And what is it about metaphors and analogies? We say it makes the abstract concrete, intangible tangible, complex simple, unfamiliar familiar. But in real language, what is the power of a metaphor? As opposed to...
Paints a picture.
In what way? How does it do that? Makes connections?
It's a shortcut for the brain, right? Because the brain learns, like, if I already know something and this is like that, then it's a quick leap for me to get. Right?
Yeah. So what happens when you use it, like I like to use a lot of baseball analogies, so I'm a big baseball fan, but what happens if you use a baseball analogy with someone from a country where they don't play baseball? Or someone who has other interests or doesn't have that knowledge? How can metaphors and analogies backfire on you if you're not aware of who your audience is?
It doesn't have meaning for them.
Why?
Because they have no frame of reference.
Yeah, there's no frame of reference, there's no concept. So if I say something is like, that's like hitting a grand slam, someone who doesn't know baseball wouldn't know what that meant, right? So you may want to find a theater analogy, a soccer analogy, or something more universal or something more specific to that person. So we're in the training field, we're in the learning and development field. What might this be a metaphor for?
Journey.
A journey, so you might talk to someone about their career path, right? And sometimes as we travel along our career path, we come to what? Right? So if you think about it, the word fork in the road is a metaphor that we often don't think about, the fact that how often we use metaphors and analogies without even realizing it. Well, what might this be a metaphor for? How might you use this? Planting the seed for an idea. So Brian Mattmore is an expert at that. What else?
Investing.
In what way?
Well, because if you put a seed in the ground, then you're investing in its future growth.
Okay, great. And bearing the fruits, right, of the seeds that you plant. So again, we use this as part of our language. So a lot of times when I do presentation skills coaching, people say, how do I deal with the fear and anxiety of public speaking? I'll say, be like a drop on a pond. What do you think that means? First of all, has anyone ever heard this analogy before? So Ross, tell us, what is that?
So what I think you see is this a duck just going along very serenely, but you don't see the legs paddling like crazy.
Right. So one of the things when I coach people, your heart may be pounding, your stomach may be about churning, your hands may be shaking, but your audience doesn't see it. So if you walk up to the front of the room and like a duck on a pond, it doesn't matter that inside your insides are churning. So if you think about what people can see versus what's going on inside, that's a way of calming yourself down. I always carry around with me this little shell. It's actually in my pocket, but there's a picture of it on the screen. I picked it up on either Fairfield or Jennings Beach a number of years ago. But I carry it in my pocket. What do you think this? I can keep this on me to remind me of, yet it doesn't seem to help.
Slow down.
So I know I have a tendency to talk fast, so sometimes I'll feel this in my pocket and say, oh yeah, I need to slow it down. Let's slow down the pace, let things sink in. Going too fast, talking too fast. So let me know if I just yell out seashell or snail, if I need to slow down a little bit. What is data visualization? Because this is a huge growing area in the field of visual thinking. So what is this about?
It's designing information so people can absorb complex ideas quickly.
Okay, great. What else?
Instant comparison of various data points.
Okay, great. So how does visualizing data help? How does, as opposed to putting up an Excel spreadsheet, and Tom was talking about, he trains people to use Excel, instead of putting up an Excel spreadsheet, what's the power of visuals?
Turns turns data into useful information.
Okay, great.
Easier to spot trends.
Okay, spot trends. Right, if you're just looking at numbers, numbers out of context don't mean anything, right? If I tell you I have a 250 average, is that good or bad? It depends, right? And when would it be good and when would it be bad?
Good bowling, bad baseball.
Exactly right. Steve gets an extra bell for that. So a number means nothing except in the context of what we're talking about. So let's say I was talking about U.S. high school dropout rates, and I was talking and we put up this graph. While I'm talking, you're trying to decipher what this says, right? So basically, if I said that almost 30% of high school students dropped out before graduation, you're looking at the numbers and the statistics. But what if instead of doing that, and I'm not even going to say a word, I'm just going to put this up. What if I put this up? Which is more powerful between this and that, right? Why? Well, that's an obvious question. So let's ask, why is this more powerful?
Yeah.
It humanizes numbers, right? So people are people, but a lot of times we get dehumanized because we get lost in the numbers, the big statistics, they don't mean anything. But if you can personalize it, if you can humanize it through a visual, that's where you really see the power of visual communication and action.
It emotionalizes
Exactly.
something that is non-emotional.
Yeah, it's emotional and it's more memorable. It'll stick with you a lot longer than just the data will. So the ultimate goal of visual or any communication is this. Right? So in a nutshell, that's what we're trying to do. Get an idea out of our minds and into the minds of someone else so they can see what we're saying. So now we've talked about visual thinking, visual communication. Now we're going to take a deep dive into visual leadership. And this is something I use in my leadership class. You can just put up the words, or I use this image to accompany it. And I divide the class into who thinks it's born, who thinks it's made, and then we divide the group up physically, and then have kind of a debate. Now, sometimes people feel this way. Right? So again, just the use of this, the power of a visual, what's the power of using a cartoon and using humor to help get your idea across?
Memorable.
It's memorable, what else? What else does humor do?
Funny.
It's funny and what? Relatable, makes people feel good to laugh, right? So I'm going to introduce you to 3 of our top visual leadership models. And Steve, I'm going to ask you for your help in just a second.
That does look like Steve, you're right.
It does. So we're going to deconstruct this guy, and let's go back to the shapes. And I'm going to ask you to take a look at these shapes and say, what does this remind you of, these 3 shapes?
Yeah, but you forgot to eat your dinner, so we got you a special, pizza from Pepe's here. Would you like to have that?
Thank you. Let me, that's not the Pizza-Rite one. These look like handouts.
I'm going to hand those out.
All right, we'll do that. Maybe Karen can help. Or not.
We
gotta go first.
He got the visual clue that she didn't move.
So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to introduce you to 3 of the top models. This is not America's Next Top Model. I think that's next door. But this is 3 of the top leadership models I use in my classes and in my workshops and my coaching practice, and I'm happy to share them with you tonight. So we're going to take one at a time. If you would, just let me give you 2 or 3 minutes. Just look through it before I introduce the 3 models to you. Some of them may look somewhat familiar, say this looks like something I already use, but take 2 or 3 minutes. All right, so the 3 models I'm going to introduce to you right now, I'm going to take them one at a time, and in my workshops, I probably spend an hour on each one. Here we only have about 5 minutes on each one. But I just want to introduce it to you, because again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. But hopefully, these are the models that you can use in your own coaching and training practice going forward. So we're going to start with what I call the pepperoni pizza. Now, we actually call it the cycle of self-development. And I won't have you draw it because you have the model in front of you, but sometimes what I do is I have people draw it, but just in the interest of time, I gave it out to you. So the cycle has these 4 components, and you have the model in front of you. It starts with, why is it, so now let's put on our hats. Everyone here, you're all ATD members in the learning community. Why, if you're trying to train someone or coach someone, what's the power of attitude? How does attitude factor in? Let's just ask that question.
Motivation.
Say again?
Motivation.
To do what?
Self-development.
Okay, so people need to be motivated and willing, right? So has anyone ever tried to coach someone against their will? So I once, I got to I once went to a workshop that Marshall Goldsmith was conducting, and he spent about 90 minutes with us afterwards, and we had one great conversation. In fact, he kept talking, and we were like, Marshall, we really have to go. And just like would not let us out the door. So, but he was a great guy, we learned a lot. But one thing he said that really stuck with me is don't coach people who don't want to be coached. Right? Sometimes we're hired, we're brought in to help someone, and then sometimes coaching is, I need you to fix this person because they're broken, and other times I need you to coach this person to help them get to the next stage, and that's, which one is more pleasurable? Right? The high performer who wants to go from good to great or great to better, it's very hard to coach people who are resistant. So having a can-do attitude and a willing attitude, let's just throw that out. What do you do if someone, you're asked to coach someone and they are resistant? They just don't want to be there. They feel like they're just being babysat. Let's just draw on the collective brain power of this room. What can you do to coach someone who's resistant to coaching?
You need to figure out why they're so resistant.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what is the disconnect between them and the person who assigned you to them? And try and get to that underlying reason.
Okay, great. What else?
What would motivate them to reverse that mindset?
Okay, great. So that's part of our job, is not just to be a coach, but actually to influence, right? To gain their buy-in, their willing cooperation. So people have to have a positive, willing attitude to be coached. Then, through the coaching and the training, we give them knowledge, right? And that can be delivered in a lot of different ways. Spoken, through reading, through videos. What are some other ways we can give people knowledge?
Self-discovery.
Self-discovery, experience, exactly right. So we give people the knowledge, they start with a positive, willing attitude, and then, what do you think the knowledge trap, but let's go back to knowledge trap in a second. They need to why is it so important to put that knowledge into practice? Because what happens if you end here, the knowledge just kind of like fills up this knowledge trap? But what does that mean when we don't put the newfound knowledge into practice?
They integrate it into their, integrate that.
Okay, great.
If you don't use it, you lose it?
Exactly right, yeah. So one of the sayings I often use is that the true value of knowledge is not in its accumulation, but in its application. It's when, just like I was saying, when you put it into apply knowledge to produce results, that's where you really see the payoff, right? So it's great to fill up that knowledge bucket, but don't let it become a knowledge trap where it just overflows without putting it into practice so you can develop new skills and new habits. So if you think about personal development, it actually, there's different components. You have the emotional component that we often overlook or forget about. There's the intellectual component, that's where you take in the new knowledge and information. There's the developmental component, that's where we put our ideas into practice. And then there's the behavioral component, that's where we develop those new skills and habits that become part of the core of who we are and how we are. So in a nutshell, that's the cycle of self-development. So at your tables, okay, for each model, we just take a couple of minutes. At your tables, talk about how you either have used something like this before, you say, oh, this is like this other model I use. Take this opportunity to share, what are your thoughts about this? Is it missing something, or how could you use it? So at your tables, 2-minute conversation. Go.
So I like these models.
And focus just on the cycle for right now. Do it, just the cycle.
So for instance, you may not have the resources to do the job. You may have a boss that says NFW, and so you're punished every time you perform. So there's a whole range of things. For this one,
Makes sense.
our environmental.
And I agree with you, but even
You take all into effect all
because
for the.
people want to do it, they have to do it. And I just tracking systems and processes that are which affects my attitude.
And this last one kind of speaks to me, because I'm coaching a guy who keeps trying to take people who from their sweet spot or growth zone into the failure zone.
Just the cycle.
They're good at it.
How
They
does it
could
apply
be.
to anything you've seen and done, how you kind of apply.
That's the career zone.
Oh, wait a minute.
Did you call that HR? Well, I call that career development. You know, passion, skill, knowledge and skills, and then, you know, what you can get paid for. But that's only 3 months, not 4. Not 2 by 2, you know. You'll fail as a consultant. No.
You can have 2 now.
No, you can have 3, but if you were good, you could have had 4.
Okay, let's just get a couple of real life examples. Who can share with us your thoughts? Even if you don't like it, tell us why you don't like it. But if you do, tell us why, how you could use this going forward. Who wants to share with us the insight around this model? There you go. Yes. So is your name?
Lorene,
Lorene?
designing learning.
Okay, let's focus on Lorene for a second. Okay.
Just to design learning, you need to think about all of this. So you start with where your learner is. So
Hold on 1 second. Let's all focus on one person at a time. So I'm sorry, Lorene, go ahead.
it's you need to start with looking at all of these pieces when you're designing learning that's effective.
Okay,
So
great.
whether
Give us an
it's-
example. Yeah,
So
build
if
on.
it's classroom training, you need to understand what are we teaching and what is the attitude of the learner coming in, right? What do they need to do, know, and say with what you're going to present or put together for them? And what do they need to do? Then they need to practice it
Mhm.
during learning. And then how are you going to know that they got that new skill, right?
Okay,
So there
great.
may be another piece of it that the manager needs to engage with that person. So for me, that's what hit home, and
Great.
it's different for online learning.
Yes. Yeah.
So
In what way? Let's
which
talk
is-
about that.
Well, I'm in the midst of doing something, and I'm working on developing a system training. And so I keep talking with my SMEs to say, yes, you don't want to overload them with text that's not going to get them to what they're going to be able to need it for. What do they have to do in their daily job? What's in it for them? And then how are we going to get them to do that? How are they going to be able to practice it in this online learning
Okay, great.
to make it valuable and meaningful when they leave?
Great. Thank you. Who else had a thought on the model in terms of how you can use it or how you've seen it used? Yeah, right.
So the one in the lower right-hand corner, passion skill matrix.
But we're not even up to that yet. Let's just focus on the cycle.
Oh, that one?
Yeah.
I will wait.
All right, we'll come back to you on that. David.
So I like the cycle a lot. The one thing that we were talking about at our table is that I can want to do it, I can know how to do it. The one thing that gets in the way sometimes is the environment.
Okay.
The right systems in place, the right processes in place, And if it's not, that then can take my attitude in a little bit of a negative spiral.
Okay, good. So sometimes it's the system that's the problem, right? So it's like someone can have good intentions, but right, the attitude could be diminished because I'm trying, but my boss won't let me, or the system is broken, right? So we've got something that, okay, great, thank you. Yes?
I think that comment goes very well into the practice. Like, is the management, someone else was mentioning, supported and understanding of what someone was just taught, and supporting them all the way through so that they can apply the skill. So you just teach 5 new people something to do, but their supervisor only knows the old way. You didn't do any good.
Okay, good. Why is it a cycle?
Because we always have to learn new things.
Yeah, we need to, right, if we don't maintain the positive attitude, if we don't keep up with new knowledge, there's a saying that in an ever-changing world, if we're standing still, we're falling behind, right? So how long, what's the shelf life of knowledge in this day and age? Right? Whether it's technology, whether it's systems, whether it's information, the world's moving faster than ever. We really need to keep our knowledge up. If we don't put things into practice, I see this a lot in training where we overload people with content and then send them back out into the real world, and we don't, while they're a captive audience, give them a chance to practice, whether it's through role play or experiential learning, so that they practice to develop those new skills. And that's part of our responsibility as trainers and coaches as well. Who else had their hands in these?
I was just going to say, I love the knowledge track, because the phases here, if you will, apply it specifically to a coaching situation. I've seen those different aspects. I like how you have it laid out, but the knowledge trap I think is great, right? Because people don't call that out as much, right?
Yeah,
So I love that,
okay,
how it's pictured.
Yeah, people say, I read the book, I went to the work training, I watched the video, but it's like, did you put, so many people, sometimes I'll do training, and then people will say, oh, I knew everything. But then you look at their 360s and how they're scored by their direct reports, and they're the worst managers in the world. So it's like, yeah, you know all this stuff. I could have written the book myself. It's like, yeah, but did you ever read it? So it's kind of like, so a lot of people, I find there's a lot of management leadership training where people think they're better. They, quote, maybe have the book smart, maybe been around for a long time, but according to the people, they may not necessarily be the best manager and or leader.
Yeah, I oftentimes in my practice use sports analogies, and I was thinking about this in the context of a good friend of mine who's a golfing buddy of mine, who was talking the other day about, I read all the magazines, I have tapes galore in my house, and I asked, do you ever go to the range? No.
Yeah.
So you never get the skill if you don't practice.
Exactly. Yeah, you can watch that video, how to play the piano overnight 100 times, right? But when you wake up the next morning, I don't think you're playing the piano overnight. So it is the practice that makes it real. That's how you develop the skills. Yeah.
So one of the things I like about the model is that, or maybe I'm misinterpreting it, but that we tend to picture it as kind of this very linear, and those relationships kind of say, hey, you may need to go back to attitude, or you may need to refresh knowledge.
Yeah, that's a great insight. It's like, yes, it is a cycle because you could fall short in any of these areas, and you just got to keep that wheel turning. And especially over time, it's like we become complacent. So it says, oh, I'm good at this, I can rest now. And you got to keep that wheel spinning. And you got to realize that learning is not just any one of these things, but all 4 of these things. So with that, we're going to move forward to the next model. We're going to take a slice out of the pie and focus on the 4 reasons for non-performance. So basically, I don't know how you draw this, but if you take a look at the model, when people don't perform, I found that it's one of these 4 reasons. Either that they don't know what to do, they don't know how to do it, they don't know why, or they don't want to. Those are I always challenge people, do you have any examples that do not fit into any of these categories? And I haven't come up with one yet. There's one that's kind of on the a gray area. We'll talk about that shortly. But as we talk about that, think about any examples that do not fit into one of these 4. So let's say you're training. So years ago, I'll use a real life example because that's the best way. Years ago, when I first moved out to LA, I took a job doing telephone sales for the LA Times because I needed a survival job. I was looking for a real job. And so they sit you down with a script and a phone and a call list and expect you to sell newspaper subscriptions, right? So I said, hi, this is Todd. First of all, I used to say, hi, this is Todd from the New York Times. And they're like, LA Times, LA Times. So one of the reasons I sold no subscriptions. But I was not a good salesperson. I was like, you don't want to buy a subscription, do you? I didn't think so. So it's like there are ways to sell and ways not to, but I had no idea what I was doing. So I was a college graduate. I knew what the phone, the script, and the call list was, so I knew what to do, but I didn't really know what. How to do it, right? So if someone doesn't know what to do, then what do? We need to, where is this not moving forward? I just lost one. There it goes. We need to educate them. If someone doesn't know what to do, you sit down and you educate them. This is what I need you to do. Here's the list. This is how you should use the script. This is how you should respond if people say this, right? So if I had the education and the knowledge, I still didn't know how to do it because I was lacking what? The experience. I was lacking the skill, so I needed training and coaching. So how would you, let's say you were the floor supervisor and you saw someone sitting there in a cubicle and had made no sales after 3 days, what would you do?
Fire.
Fire them. Great. Exactly right. But still, what's another option before that?
Role play with them.
Role play. What else?
Sit down and call, listen to what they're doing, and then coach them.
Exactly. Instead of just yelling, it's like, you're not doing this right. What he did, he finds his shove over, and he said, watch me. He made a few calls. Then he said, let me watch you. And they said, no, you did this well, but you didn't do this well. And then over time, one of the things he was actually showing me, he actually made a sale. I was like, do I get credit for that? He said, no. So what's the difference? A lot of times people use education and training interchangeably. We're all in this business. So how would you differentiate to someone who doesn't understand the distinction? What's the difference between educating someone and training them or coaching them?
Book learning and hands-on.
Say again?
Book learning and hands-on.
Okay, expand on that.
Well, you can read all the books you want, but you actually have to talk on the phone to someone. So, what you said about piano.
Okay, great. What else? What else would you say about distinguishing between educating someone and training them?
It goes back to that practice part where you see, you let them apply what they've learned and see what kind of results they produce, and based on those results, you can circle back. So.
Right, great. Yeah, I mean, education leads to knowledge, training, coaching leads to skill. So it's kind of like we need to think about where that person is and what we're trying to help them do. Now let's move up the ladder. In my scenario, I still wasn't really selling. What do people need to know why about? Need to know why what?
The purpose behind it.
Yeah, the purpose. So if he said, you need to do it this way, I need to be able to understand why. Why do we do it this way? If the customer says this, you need to say this. Well, I don't understand why. Explain to me why that's a better response. So if someone doesn't know why, we need to explain to them. And so many times bosses, you say, I've told you, how many times do I have to tell you? And telling someone 1,000,000 times doesn't explain the why unless you took the time to help the person understand why they need to do what you want them to do. And what about the want to? How do you get someone to want to do something? What are they lacking?
Motivation.
Two things. They could be lacking motivation, but they also might be lacking what? The looks that may sometimes appear like a lack of motivation, but it could be a lack of confidence. Yeah. A lot of times, after failing so often, I was still motivated because I needed to make money, but I was lacking my confidence in my ability to do it. A lot of times, then what happens, what are some of the warning signs of someone lacks motivation? They show up late, or they drag their feet, or they don't do certain things, and sometimes they could be discouraged and lacking confidence, and not necessarily need a kick in the pants, but they need someone to help them rebuild that confidence that they're lacking. So that's something that the astute leader realizes that not every manager does. So this is the 4 reasons in a nutshell. What do the bottom 2 have in common, and what do the top 2 have in common? The bottom 2, the person in essence is saying what? Exactly right. I can't reach out and have. I can't do it. I lack the ability or the experience. The top 2 are saying what? I won't. I'm not willing, or I don't have the right attitude. Again, it could be lack of confidence, or it could be lack of motivation. It could be I'm not buying into this, so I'm not doing it. Why is it so important to distinguish between the I can't and I won't?
Well, the I can't is kind of why we're in the room, partially. We're trying to educate and train, and the I won't is maybe something you're not touching. Maybe something else going on in the organization that's making you think I won't.
Okay, great. What else? What else would you add to that?
I can't almost seems more mechanical. The I won't seems more sort of mental.
Yeah, that's a great insight. When I do my management leadership training, and I won't go into that in great detail because of the time, but basically, which is more management and which is more leadership?
I can't manage.
Yeah, right? So if someone is, management, there's a saying that you manage the process, you lead the people, right? These are process related. If someone can't do something because they don't understand what to do or how to do it, you need to put on a management hat and basically help them understand and navigate the process. If someone's saying, I won't do it because of a willingness or attitude issue, that's where you really need to connect to the person as a human being and find out what makes them tick. Why are they lacking confidence? Why are they lacking motivation? So what's a great insight is that this is kind of a management versus leadership type of solution. Again, we talk a lot about that, but we just want to focus on this for right now. So before we go to the last model, same thing. Take 2 minutes at your table and say, how can I use this going forward? Because again, we said that the magic of all this is how can I apply it. So just say, what do you think of this model? And have you seen it in action? And or this is, I could use this to solve a certain problem. So take 2 or 3 minutes at your table. Go.
I think I have. Very excited. They're on the way out. So if you're doing an innovation session, you know, you have to have that total. That's gotten all done before. Yep, great point. So this might work for sales. Different and different. It's also technology.
Okay, so let's get a couple of real life examples. So who wants to give us one example of anything you were talking about at your table? Anyone at the back of this table here? Any insights that you'd like to share?
We said...
Let's all focus. Hold on 1 second. One time, Brian.
I'm just sort of summarizing what I thought was a good conversation for the table. We were saying that sometimes, and particularly for millennials, you want to start with the why. Because if you have a compelling why, all the other stuff you can maybe even put up with. If I don't want to go through all this stuff, but the why is compelling enough, you might stay with it, and you also might therefore be more loyal to the organization.
Okay, great. That's a great. There's actually a book called "Start with Why" by. Does everyone know who wrote it? Simon Sinek. Right. So that's his. So he has a very. So his thing is go from the why to the what, to the how to the what. Sorry. Right? From the why to the how to the what. Right. So he does say start with why. Right. So that's just so that's another way of looking at this model in another way. Great. Who else has an insight or anything you talked about in terms of real life applications of this model? What? Yeah.
I mean, there's other models that have similar content, but this gets to the common sense, and you can always get into the sophistication of it, but first understand the dynamics of what we're talking about before we get into what are the twists that you can run into.
Okay, great. Yeah, I probably use this model if not more than any other, basically my top three, which is why I included it tonight, because a lot of times when we're dealing with performance issues, so often I've seen managers misdiagnose the root cause. And if you do that, then you're just taking the wrong approach, right? So if someone doesn't know what to do, all the cheerleading in the world is not going to fix the problem. And if someone doesn't want to do something, you can explain it a million times and send them out to training. They still don't want to do it. You haven't fixed that problem. So that's a very common thing. So managers don't realize that I didn't diagnose the root cause, I'm just trying to put band-aid solutions on things. So what else? Any other insights? Any other conversations that happen?
Todd, when I do work with the intact teams and we talk about where they are in the phase of working together and achieving their goals, this would be interesting to put up against it when they run into any level of it where they run into a problem. To see, okay guys, do we know what to do? Do we know how to do it? Just to help them pinpoint where the issue is, whether it's trust, commitment, or whatever.
Okay. I mean, I'm not sure, I use this a lot of times in combination with the 5 dysfunctions.
That's exactly how I thought.
Yeah, so if you look at the team and say we're dysfunctional, it's one thing to say, let's look at the 5 things, but then use this kind of side by side.
Exactly.
Kind of say, that's great. That's a great point that Denise is making, that a lot of times these models don't exist in isolation, right? All of these are just different frameworks through which we can frame reality and turn complexity into simplicity in some way. If we can put things into boxes or into levels or into, what's the value of doing that? We're taking a messy situation and people are complex and problems are complex, but what's the value of saying, whether it's using DISC or social styles or any of 5 dysfunctions, any of these models, what's the value and the power of saying, where does this fit into this framework?
I think it just helps people focus in on it, maybe be a little less emotional and more specific.
Yeah. What else?
I think it gives you an orientation, so then you know how to move forward, right?
Yeah. It kind of, basically what a frame does is it sets the parameters and say, where does this fit? A lot of times we force things and say, you know what, this doesn't fit, then maybe this isn't the right model. Maybe we need to find another model and another way of looking at things. But that's the value and the power of all of these different frameworks. So with that, let's go to our final of our 3 as we start to wrap up the evening. And Passion Skill Matrix is one, this is one that my students find very valuable. And actually, I'll tell you more about it in just a second. So basically, if you think about it, one of the things that people do is make a list of, think about your job or your work week, list the things you are good at and not good at, love to do and don't love to do, and then let's plot them on this matrix. So if you, and even how much, you can even quantify it. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you love doing this? Is it a 6 or is it a 10, right? So if you love doing something and you're great at it, that fits into your sweet spot. That's the area, that's where you're in that state of flow, that's where your time flies by, that's where people recognize you, you look at the go-to person or the guru of that area, that's where you really shine. That's where people like to spend most of their time. The growth zone is where when you're doing things that maybe you're not great at yet, but you have a passion for it or an interest in it, and you want to be better at it, right? So we call it the growth zone. The lower right, the default zone, those are things that you maybe are good at or even great at, but you don't necessarily love. Maybe you used to, maybe you're burnt out, maybe you're tired of it. But that's, people look to you as the go-to person. When I was at my previous company, people knew I was an English literature major, so they'd say, oh, let Todd proofread that. Let Todd, edit that. And it's like I became the go-to person for proofreading, and even though I was good at it, I didn't necessarily want that dumped on me just because that was a skill set that I had. And that was a very common thing that I saw. And lastly, the failure zone, that's where we're not good at it, we don't like it, and we never will be. We have no interest in getting better, and it's just not in our area of expertise. So those are basically the 4 quadrants. So ideally, we want to spend as much possible in our sweet spot, but why don't we want to spend all of our time there? No growth, right? So we want to be spending ideally 60, 70, 80% of our time above that line, above the 5. Now, let's go back for a second. Is it possible to turn something from a failure zone or default zone into a growth zone or even a sweet spot? So who has an example of that? Real life example of, I was in the failure zone and now I'm in the sweet spot. Okay.
E-learning.
Okay, talk about that.
So, especially laid off, but initially I was scared by the technology. This was in a previous company. But I became intrigued by what it could do, by the scalability. And I eventually got very excited and they liked it so much, they laid me off and just did that.
Yeah, so sometimes we're in a failure zone because we have a fear, or we don't have the aptitude, or we think we don't. For me, presentation skills and public speaking was something I was in my failure zone. In all my years of school, I never raised my hand, I never spoke in a class. I was terrified of public speaking for most of my life until I was around 35, and I was working for the American Management Association, and I was behind the scenes helping to redesign their mini MBA program, and we were doing a management course for presidents, 12 CEOs of small companies in Hilton Head, and the trainer didn't show up. He basically called, I was sick, I missed my flight, and we had a group of CEOs and no one to do the training. And I called the office, I called my boss, I said, what do we do? He said, well, you'll have to do it. I'm like, hello, I think we have a bad connection. I had never been in front of a room in my life. He said, we have two choices. We have to refund everyone's money, and it's really embarrassing, and they paid to go. The trainer will get there by tonight or tomorrow. I did it. It wasn't the worst experience of my life, and it wasn't great, no. But he said, you know the content inside and out, just do it. So I did it, and you know what? It wasn't terrible. I didn't hate it, and little by little, I took Dale Carnegie courses, I became a class coach, and now I do this every single day for a living. So I always use that as a story with my students, because the fear of public speaking is very common. It just shows that something in your failure zone, if you give it a shot and develop it, can ultimately maybe become a sweet spot. I'm sure we all have those stories. It could be sports, it could be anything, it could be part of our career. So with that in mind, Ross, you had mentioned there was something about, what do you want to say about it?
That's right. So what I've got is someone I'm coaching, and he says, you know, I've got people who are really great at these things, but I need them to do other things.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's shifting people around because he can. He's the CEO, but he's moving them into places where maybe they're not so good, or maybe they're in the default zone, but he's taking really, you know, people who are world-class, passionate about what they want to do, and moving them away into places where either they're going to be in the default zone or the failure zone.
So what's the impact of that?
So he's going to lose these people, or his business is going to fail. So that's or it won't be as good as it is. So he's moving them to the sweet spot.
You maybe want to use this to explain it to them. It's like you're setting people, you're literally setting people up for failure. Now, if someone's in the default zone, maybe someone has that skill set, someone else has something in their growth zone. I actually did a team building workshop out in LA a couple months ago, and we had everyone in a group of 24 people in this team. Everyone filled this out for themselves. We put them all up on the wall, and then we created one master passion skill matrix for the whole team. And people would say, oh, you think you're terrible at that? I thought you were great at it. It's like, oh, you hate doing that? I thought you loved doing that. So what they did is they redistributed the workload. And there were people who said, oh, you have that in your growth zone. Why don't you work with so-and-so who has the default zone? They'll train you, hand that off, and then that frees you up to take on some of your growth zone. So it was a really great way to redistribute and redesign people's responsibilities.
Can you give a little more detail around that? Because I think as you think from a succession planning perspective, you want people to be in growth zones, you want them away from failure zones, you want them to think about where they need to develop their strengths and what they're passionate about. And as you talked, I didn't have a picture of what that would look like on the wall. So if you could just...
Yeah, we actually had this as a worksheet. Everyone filled it out and said, let's use presentation skills. If someone said, presentation skills it's kind of like in my failure zone, but I would like to be better at it. Like if someone has it as a 4 here, then how could you nudge them up to like a 5 or a 6? And then say maybe this person with some training and coaching and more, let this person run a meeting, send this person out for training, and help them develop those skills. If someone hates their job, I had a job years ago, I took a job as Vice President of Business Development for a web design company because I was out of work, it was a great title, it was a VP salary. And I couldn't have been more miserable. I hated every second of it. I literally took a job for the wrong reason, and I basically locked myself into the failure zone because I didn't love a lot of the things you needed to do to be successful in that job, which was selling, because I wasn't a salesperson or a networking person. And I didn't have any interest in doing that. And even with all the training in the world, I still would have hated it. So when you lock yourself into the failure zone, sometimes the only choice is to leave and say, this is not the right fit for me. But by doing this, you kind of realize that, like the light bulb goes on. So I kind of put myself in the wrong box, and there's no way out. Yeah.
I think it's more common for people to lock themselves in their default zone. Where I can do it,
I could do it 9 to 5.
Yeah.
I want to get home because I want to see my family and walk the dog, and I don't.
Is that okay? Is it okay if someone just has a job that it's just a paycheck and they're just in the default zone and they're...
You know, I think there's a balance. If that's what they're doing and this is that time in their life, then that's okay.
Yeah.
But you don't want, they're not going to stay in it, and they're not going to stay with you unless you find something to grow them in.
Yeah.
So there is a time period where everyone, I think, is in their default zone.
It's almost like the Peter principle in some ways, right? Like you've done it so long, you just show up, and you're not growing, you're not learning, and maybe you become demotivated, and we're trying to increase employee engagement. How engaged are people who are just show up in the default zone every single day?
I know people who work in the default zone because it funds their sweet spot, hobby, passion thing outside that. And so they're not miserable there, but that's a way to fund something else that isn't their sweet spot.
That's a great insight. That's a great spot. Your sweet spot doesn't have to come from your job. It's nice if it does, but it's not a must-have. One of the things about this is not prescriptive. This doesn't say you should do this based on this. This is just a way of taking your reality and framing it in a way that starts the conversation. So that's a really nice insight.
I think that, in the context of this model, if companies understood it more, it'd be less reason to have 70% of employees disengaged per valve. Or I just heard a Bloomberg study that said 60% of employees are looking for another job right now.
Which is great for search firms and people who are in that business, but it's not great if you invested in training your people and they're walking out the door because they are disengaged. So, great. So we're going to move ahead and just start to wrap up the evening. So you have these 3 miles. I just want to wrap this up as it relates to the Passion Skill Matrix. Frederick Taylor, who has his pros and cons himself, but one of his quotes that I do like is that people do best what they like best to do. And if people are engaged and doing something that they're passionate about, or maybe they're not passionate about it yet. Has anyone ever read Carol Dweck's mindset, growth mindset, fixed mindset? If you haven't, I recommend being familiar with that. It's Carol Dweck, D-W-E-C-K. Someone who has a fixed mindset thinks what?
That's the way it is.
That's the way it is. I'm either good at it or I'm not. A growth mindset adds the word yet. I'm not good at this like I was with public speaking. I'm not good at this yet. And just adding that word yet opens up the world of possibilities. So just to start to wrap up, these are 3 of the top models that we like to use. So let's put our pizza back in the box and close it. So you can take that with you and use it. So what questions do you have? Let's just take a couple of minutes of any questions that you have about anything from tonight. Anyone? No? Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do right now, just on your piece of paper with your drawing that you can take home with you, I'm going to ask you 2 quick questions. What was your big takeaway from tonight? What was one thing that you're going to remember? And also, what's the big action that you're going to take? What's the one thing that you're going to do going forward as a result of something you learned tonight? So take 60 seconds and write down one big takeaway and one big action. Go. 60 seconds on the clock. You also write on your booklet, there's a little notes area there as well. All right, so time is up. Just to wrap up, I want to leave you with a couple of just things to think about. So speaking of frogs and your big action, some of you may have heard this before. If there are 5 frogs in a log and one decides to jump in, how many are left? It's still 5. You decided to jump in, but you didn't actually do it. So it's actually the doing that counts. You can decide all you want, but until you actually do something different, it's not going to happen. So I encourage you to try visual thinking, visual communication, and become a more visual leader and take the leap, and I think you'll be glad that you did. And lastly, next time you're driving and you see a sign that says, always have a pencil and paper with you just in case you ever come across a sign that says, Strawberry. So thank you very much, and I appreciate you having
me. Thank you, Todd. Terrific. Another hand. Come on, guys. All right, a quick reminder, you have evaluations on your tables. Michelle won't let you leave unless you hand one in. And I think we have a drawing, Michelle?
Yes.
Anybody else want to put a card in for a free meeting?
Yeah, good. Michelle?
While we're waiting for Michelle, one thing I would like to say to those of you who are here tonight, when the survey comes around in the latter part of June, think about that survey is really for you all in terms of what you would like us to deliver for you in terms of programs, etc., as a chapter. I think we had a wonderful response rate of about 29 people, some 800 people we sent the survey to. It doesn't take a lot of time, but the feedback's really important.
Could you give that to me in a graph and a visual?
Needle in a haystack.
We're not going to let him come anymore. Monica.
All right.
Start your membership.
She's gonna sell it.
All right, everybody, thanks for coming.